Down on the southeast once again. Will the government need more money for the battered region? That's Topping the Hill on NewsNation tonight. Live look right now, the Miami area of Florida, that right there. Donald Trump set to speak this hour on the one-year anniversary of October 7th. The day in which the foreign terrorist organization Hamas stunned Israel, slaughtering 1,200 Israelis and over 40 Americans. The terrorists took 254 hostages, including 12 Americans, 4 of whom are still being held tonight. Earlier today, Donald Trump meeting with the Orthodox Jewish community in New York. President Biden lighting a candle during a service at the White House and leaving the talking up to his vice president, the Democratic nominee, Kamala Harris.
I will never forget October 7, and the world must never forget. We must work to ensure nothing like the horrors of October 7 can ever happen again.
And on the streets of New York, seemingly little regard for the commemoration as anti-Israel activists marched at points today. But first tonight, the Southeast on alert yet again. Hurricane Milton becoming just the second storm in at least 60 years to form as a Category 5 in the Gulf Coast. Sustained winds right now of 175 miles per hour. Expected to hit, as you can see there, the western part of Florida as a major hurricane roughly 48 hours from now. Milton expected to impose catastrophic damage less than 2 weeks after the Category 4 Hurricane Helene made landfall, flattening parts of Florida and causing historic storm damage in parts of Georgia, North Carolina, and Tennessee, all still recovering this evening. A live look right now at Tampa, Florida, which could be the site of direct landfall. And that right there is quite literally the calm before the storm. We will take you to the National Hurricane Center in Miami in a moment, but first tonight to the Congressman Michael Waltz, Republican from Florida, who represents parts of Northeast Florida, which is also bracing for impact this evening. Congressman, thanks for being with us here on the Hill. Appreciate it. 2 storms in less than 2 weeks in that part. What are you preparing for tonight, and what is your biggest worry this evening?
Well, I was with our emergency operations folks at the county level today, and they're getting ready. It's really the thing that's so worrying is it's the 1-2 punch here, and it's the amount of debris from Helene that is still sitting out on roads, still sitting in people's yards. These are 2x4s, couches, pieces of sheetrock. Every one of those pieces of debris that hasn't been cleaned up yet will turn into a missile, will turn into a projectile with 170-mile-an-hour winds. And then you layer on top of that the water. And the ground is incredibly saturated. Our rivers and lakes are still topped off. So when you're looking at that type of flooding, and it's not, I mean, the West Coast is bracing for impact, but it really is the entire state. It's expected to exit the East Coast as a hurricane, and those winds will whip around like a right hook. So even if you're not on the West Coast, everybody has to be prepared and evacuate if you can.
Yeah, go through right the middle portion of the state up to the Northeast where you're sitting and joining us this evening. Any concerns tonight about the federal response? There's been lots of talk in the recent days about the federal response for Helene.
Well, I think you're going to see Governor DeSantis. He just mobilized 8,000 Florida National Guardsmen, and Florida established with COVID a state guard as well, so that we don't have to be as reliant on the feds. I mean, you saw Biden and Harris wait a week just to mobilize 1,000 active duty soldiers with Hurricane Helene when you have the entire 82nd Airborne Division right down the street from the mountains of West Virginia. So we need to be able to take care of things on our own. What's that?
Should active duty be mobilized where you are? Do you want that?
Well, if we need it, I think we're going to be relying and looking heavily on what's under the governor's control, which is the state guard and the National Guard that's under his control. But on Helene, absolutely they should have been. And the thing is to have them ready. all of the requests, all of the orders, all of the paperwork and the funding should be pre-positioned. That should be done beforehand. You don't wait till a week after to start moving through the bureaucracy. And unfortunately, that's what happened in North Carolina.
Congressman, there will be devastation. That is a fact. And this will be, as you mentioned, the 1-2 punch, the second storm. And there's a conversation here in Washington about whether or not more funding is needed for FEMA. Would you support more funding for FEMA? Do you think Congress should be called back to vote on that?
Yeah, I think so. Look, we have to make sure that we have accurate estimates of what's needed. I'm not for just throwing billions around. FEMA needs to be putting it in the right places. We don't need to be putting hundreds of millions, if not billions, towards illegal immigrants. But if we get the right protocols in place, which we absolutely should, and I'm convinced the Republican House would, then yeah, we need to get people the resources and the support that they need. It's their money. They've already paid into the system. Let's help fellow Americans.
Congressman Waltz for us tonight, Northeast Florida. Congressman, stay safe and best of luck in the upcoming days. Thanks for joining us here on the Hill.
All right, thank you.
You got it. All right, preparations, evacuations now underway across the Sunshine State. Traffic is always a concern. Once the authorities say get out and folks start to get out, you can see backups in parts of the states, and that's always one of the worries leading into this. Over to the National Hurricane Center now. Jamie Roan is with us from the National Hurricane Center live here on the Hill this evening. He's the deputy director at the NHC. Jamie, thanks for being with us. What is the biggest concern right now as we look at that path and talk about a major hurricane yet again?
Well, there's two big concerns tonight. This red area here denoting a hurricane warning with its potential for very impactful winds along the I-4 corridor. So you've got significant populations at risk with widespread power outages. And then the other one is storm surge. And I'm going to show you our peak storm surge forecast now, 10 to 15 feet possible near and to the east of where the system Milton makes landfall, and that could potentially impact Tampa Bay or Sarasota area.
No two storms are the same, obviously, Jamie, but clearly we are talking about two powerful and huge storms right back to back. What's the difference as you see it right now with Milton versus what we saw a couple weeks ago with Helene?
But right now, Milton's a compact little storm. That's what enabled it to
it's small, right? It's small and tight in there.
Yeah, it's a small, and that's what enables it to go so quickly to Category 5, because it's sort of compact. Now, as it approaches the Florida Peninsula, it's going to start to have some changes and evolution. So it's going to get much, much bigger in size. And this is going to deceive people because at the same time, the intensity is going to start to come down or diminish. This size is good. This size increase is going to make it closer to Helene. Helene was sort of a big storm, and so I don't want people to focus too much on this dropping intensity because the growth in size will more than compensate for it.
Right. It's a Category 5. You expect it to land as a 3 or 4, right? But even then, it's 130 mile per hour sustained winds, give or take.
Right. And so what happens to people is they see a 5, they see a 5 now, and then they say, okay, it's only going to make landfall as a 3 or a 4. It's sort of natural to do that comparison. But a Category 3 or 4 is still a major hurricane. It's still an incredibly powerful hurricane. So I don't want people to make that mistake. And because it's going to grow in size simultaneous, I think we're just going to see a broad swath of destructive winds that cut across the Florida Peninsula, possibly the I-4 corridor, and then someone in this purple area is going to get up to 15 feet of storm surge.
I-4 corridor that Jamie's talking about there is basically Tampa to Orlando, just to give you an idea of what meteorologists like him are watching for all across Florida this evening. Jamie from the National Hurricane Center, thank you, sir, for being with us here on the Hill. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You got it. All right. Live look right now, by the way, in Israel, at least across the border into Lebanon, as our strongest ally in the Middle East is in the middle of a war on several fronts. Israel, by the way, fended off more missiles today and marked one of the darkest days in its history. A year ago, more than 1,200 Israelis, including more than 40 Americans, murdered by Hamas terrorists in a surprise attack. Our Robert Sherman live for us once again in Israel tonight. Robert, President Biden choosing not to call Benjamin Netanyahu today. That raised a few eyebrows. The presidential candidates commemorating it in their own ways. Donald Trump live later this hour. You've been on the ground, though, in Israel. I wonder what the mood is like as you see it today.
You know, Blake, what I would tell you here today is just standing out here and talking with people all across this country. There is just this incredulousness still 1 year later among people. Disbelief that October 7th happened a year ago. Disbelief that it could have possibly happened. And today you had people all across the country memorializing what happened, trying to remember the lives lost, remember those who were taken hostage. And in some of these communities, such as Kibbutz Nir Oz, where we were earlier today, that was a community of less than 400 people before October 7th. 29 of them are still being held in Gaza to this day. So there's so much that has not been solved yet, and there's so much more work that has to be done. That's why I would say that there's this huge cloud of uncertainty over the air in many aspects. People don't know the direction of this war. People also don't know the direction of how, when, if Israel will strike back against Iran. That is something that is lurking in the distance here. So you talk about all of this here, you know, people on the ground here, they just have no idea what these coming days are going to bring. And that's the thing, Blake. You go 1 year ago, there was so much uncertainty here. Fast forward to today, a lot has happened. People still have no idea what the coming days will bring. Blake?
Our Robert Sherman live for us tonight in Israel. Robert, thank you. Joining us now is Morgan Ortagus, former spokesperson for the State Department in the Trump administration. Morgan met with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and she joins us live tonight from Jerusalem. Morgan, I appreciate you staying up late with us tonight in Israel. You were with Benjamin Netanyahu in the room with him today. What was that like? What was your takeaway from what he had to say?
Well, first, thank you for letting me come on the show. It's really important for me to be on the show to talk about this anniversary, and especially to be here in Israel with the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, Minister Dermer, and so many people from the War Cabinet here to commemorate this day. I will tell you that the tone is very different than I expected. And I mean that positively, Blake, but I expected a very somber, dour, type of day, which it is. Nobody is by any means dismissing the loss of life. But I saw the resiliency of the Israeli people. I was in a shawarma shop at 10:30 tonight, and soldiers, policemen, local people were dancing to Yallah Nasrallah, which, if those of you pay attention to things on the internet, they're saying goodbye to Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah that Israel killed 2 weeks ago. And I was meeting with the minister today, and he had a great line, and I had to share this. He said, 1 year later, Israel doesn't hang in the balance, but our enemies do. So I felt when meeting with Netanyahu and his cabinet, I felt sort of a wind at their back. They were knocked down. They tried to destroy the Jewish people. They tried to destroy the state of Israel. This war is by no means over, but I certainly felt an emboldened Israeli government today that I met with.
What do you think the next year? I hate to put a timeline on it, but obviously we're looking a year back to October 7th. But what do you think the next year for Israel and that region holds, Morgan?
Great question, Blake. I do think that what is really important, there's a fundamental truth for Israel that's important to them before this war can, can quote unquote end. Sorry about that.
Live TV in the middle of the night. You're all good. You're all good.
Yeah, there you go. And that is what is fundamental for Israel, Blake, is that Hamas cannot be in charge in Gaza. So Israel has been working for the past year on rooting them out militarily, but they don't want them to have any political power in Gaza when all of this is over. They don't want them to be a part of the reconstruction effort. So that is really what I see, what I heard today from the Israeli government, that is a red line for them, Blake. Hamas cannot have military power. They can't have governing power. They can't be in charge of reconstruction. It would be a loss for Israel in the mind of their leaders today if Hamas had any viability once this war is over.
And Morgan, I got like 30 seconds with you, but what's the sense that you had as to Iran and what Israel does next there?
They didn't tell us what they're going to do, but it's clear they're going to hit back. I think it's going to be very strong. They told me that they did not want a war with Iran, but Iran cannot send hundreds of ballistic missiles over once a quarter and think they can get away with that.
Morgan Ortagus with Benjamin Netanyahu earlier today, staying up late for us in Jerusalem this evening. Morgan, thanks so much. Safe travels back. Talk to you soon. You got it.
Thanks, Blake.
All right, still to come here on The Hill. You are looking live right now, Doral, Florida, where Donald Trump will speak later this hour at an October 7th remembrance event. When that happens, we will take you there live. Plus, Hurricane Milton continues to make its way across the Gulf Coast. What government officials are doing to prepare for this monster, a Category 5 storm pointing right at Florida. Plus, Elon Musk stumps for Trump over the weekend. And did you see who Kamala Harris is talking to? You've got Elon Musk on the trail and Kamala Harris getting involved with Call Her Daddy. What's that all about on the other side of the break? All right, so here's a first. Elon Musk and Call Her Daddy. We are talking politics. Over the weekend, the world's richest man, Elon Musk, appearing at Donald Trump's rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, the site of Trump's first assassination attempt.
As you can see, I'm not just MAGA, I'm dark MAGA. If they don't, this will be the last election. That's my prediction.
And we learned that Vice President Harris appeared on Call Her Daddy. Now, if you've never heard of it, it's Alex Cooper's podcast, the most listened to podcast by women. It focuses on relationships and sex.
I saw the governor of Arkansas said, "My kids keep me humble." Unfortunately, Kamala Harris doesn't have anything keeping her humble. How did that make you feel?
I don't think she understands that there are a whole lot of women out here who, one, are not aspiring to be humble.
Joining me now here on the Hill, Joel Rubin, Democratic strategist. Michaela Carr is the former chief of staff for Speaker McCarthy. Ashley Davis, former official in the George W. Bush White House. And Scott Bolden, NewsNation political contributor. Hello to you all. Nice to have you all in. Hello. We started the weekend of, okay, Elon Musk is going to campaign alongside Donald Trump. That's interesting. And then I was like, whoa, Kamala Harris going on Call Her Daddy. Smart? Do you think it's the right move for her to do something like that?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, I would think that most of the women that listen to the podcast are probably people that are going to support her anyway. So I don't know how many new voters that she brings on, but that's her audience. And I said this morning on your NewsNation show, the same thing. I mean, they have every right to do. Obviously, I don't know if it's going to make any difference with any of these interviewers that she's doing, because she's doing The View, she's doing Colbert, the same.
Yeah, so this is kind of like a friendly tour. There's 60 Minutes, right? 60 Minutes, of course.
Yes.
And then there's the friendly tour, Scott. Like she's doing this, she's doing The View. She's doing Howard Stern, right? Folks, Colbert, folks in her corner.
You wanted more press. You wanted more one-on-ones. You wanted more interviews. You got it. Are you bragging or complaining? She's giving you what you want, and you say they're friendly. Well, there are a lot of independent women out there and moderate Republican women who listen to these shows. And I thought a response to the governor of Arkansas' comments about her humility was spot on. There are some women, most women, at least professional women, don't aspire to be humble. But more importantly, she does have kids. And they do keep her humble, and she's helped raise those kids. And while they may not have come out of her, I said she is humbled by her kids. She has kids. She has her bonus children that she helped raise. And so that could have been the second part of her answer.
What about her going on this podcast?
Look, I think you're right in that we've asked for more media, but it isn't we. It's independent, moderate voters who are trying to decide.
People want to hear more from her.
But they want to hear about affordability. They want to hear about the economy. They want to hear about immigration. They want to hear how her rhetoric on immigration that has changed matches or doesn't her record on having a wide open border. I don't know that these are the places where she's going to get into that, but we'll take what we can get.
Folks do want to learn about her policy, right? And that seems to be like one of the big things holding her back at this point, potentially, to reaching a much higher ceiling. Does that cut through, like going on Howard Stern and...
It absolutely does. And I think, to Scott's point, she has to be on all the different platforms right now. We're 1 month out to the election. Can't believe it's going to be 4 weeks from tomorrow. And getting on all these different platforms, having the clips cut, shared, pushed out on social media, that's the strategy for the final stretch here. And she's going to audiences where she's able to communicate in a more comprehensive way as well. And that's very important to get her full message out as opposed to very stilted, quick interviews in the debate format, which was not that kind of a place for her to present herself fully.
Elon Musk, Donald Trump. Do you want him back out there on the trail more?
Absolutely. I think there is a misunderstanding of how Elon Musk is viewed right now. I think in a lot of those country, there is a great fear that Democrats are trying to rewrite or possibly erase the First Amendment. And Elon Musk is viewed as someone who is an absolute First Amendment purist. And when you have Joe Biden creating a misinformation czar, absolutely. Well, that's what I'm saying. That's how he's viewed. He's not trying to get your vote, though.
But he's suppressing Democratic amplification on Twitter left and right, and that is not an absolutism for free speech.
Yeah. But he has 200 million followers, most importantly. But what I think is very interesting, and I agree with you, I think that it's good getting him out on the campaign trail. However, he's now doing more campaign events in Pennsylvania. They just announced. And so he must have done something. I mean, they're watching everything that happens after these rallies.
Real quick, Scott.
Real quick. Elon Musk and MAGA are like oil and water. Did you see him jumping on stage? It was just weird. He can't relate to those folks, and he was terribly uncomfortable. He's not winning any votes for Donald Trump.
So to Ashley's point, the thing that I noticed from Elon was they put him he was at a Steelers game, right?
Yeah,
that's
we
like
lost.
We
lost the game, and everybody's blaming him for the terrible talent.
There's clearly a sense there of putting Elon in Pennsylvania, and I just wonder if we're going to see more of him down the line. By the way, Barack
they
Obama
announced that today he is going to campaign in Pennsylvania by himself.
And Barack Obama out on the campaign trail later this week as well for Kamala Harris. All right, still much more ahead here on the Hill. Another live look. Donald Trump in Doral, Florida. That's just west of Miami, or the greater Miami area, where he will meet with members of the Jewish community as Israel marks 1 year since the October 7th attack. We discuss on the other side of the break, and once Trump appears, we will take you there live. And Florida's Gulf Coast bracing for a second massive hurricane. Would you look at that? Milton is a 5 and expected to hit in 48 hours. We're back in a few. Welcome back here to the Hill on NewsNation. Live look now as former President Donald Trump is set to deliver remarks at an October 7th remembrance event with Jewish community leaders in Florida. It's taking place at one of his properties in Doral. We will bring you those comments as soon as Donald Trump takes to the microphone. But joining us tonight here on the Hill, Congressman Jake Auchincloss, Democrat from Massachusetts, who's back on the show this evening. Congressman, thanks for being with us here on the Hill. We're going to hear from Donald Trump momentarily. We heard from Kamala Harris earlier today. What is the right response, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican? What do you think is the right response from our leaders that at least you want to hear from either both sides of the aisle when it comes to Israel at this moment in time?
Thanks for having me on this evening. On the 1 year anniversary of October 7th, politics really should not be center stage. This needs to be about the victims and the hostages. We owe it to the more than 1,200 individuals who were massacred 1 year ago. We owe it to the hostages who are still torn from their families living in these terror tunnels underneath Gaza to center them and their experience and their memory today. Right after we speak, I'm going to be going to an event with the greater Boston Jewish community, and not a single politician is going to speak. We're going to sing together, we're going to mourn together, we're going to hold close the hostages together, and that's the way it should be, because the 1 year anniversary is a day of remembrance and reflection coming during the high holidays for the Jewish people. It's not a day for political grandstanding.
The remembrance and the commemoration taking place today and then on October 8th and beyond, Congressman, the questions will continue about what happens inside Israel, what happens in that region. We learned today that President Biden did not speak with his counterpart, with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Why, and is that a mistake?
The Biden administration and the Netanyahu administration are in close collaboration on a daily basis. Just because the two principals are not speaking doesn't mean that there is not intelligence sharing, military sharing, and of course, diplomatic collaboration. But you used a word earlier that I think we should double click on, the questions going forward. I would use a different term. I would say the two different stories going forward, because fundamentally that is what we are contesting. There is one view of what's happening in the Middle East that is a story about the Israelis as settler colonialists who are the oppressor of an oppressed people. And then there's another narrative that Israel is fighting on the side of freedom and democracy against barbarity and terrorism. And what we need to be able to do here in the United States and in Israel is to rally the rest of the world and freedom-loving people everywhere to understand that this is fundamentally a fight for freedom against terrorism, and Israel and the United States share that fight together.
So you talk about the fight going forward. The vice president was asked in an interview, Congressman, whether or not Benjamin Netanyahu is an ally. And at the vice presidential debate between Senator Vance and Tim Walz last week, they were both asked about what they would do, how they would advise going forward as it relates to the war and the situation in the Middle East. I want you to take a listen to Kamala Harris's response in the 60 Minutes interview and to J.D. Vance's answer during the debate, and I'll get your reaction on the other side.
With all due respect, the better question is, do we have an important alliance between the American people and the Israeli people? And the answer to that question is yes.
And we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Does it concern you how the vice president answered that question, especially compared to how the vice presidential nominee on the other side of the aisle answered?
No, because she answered it like a stateswoman should answer it, which is to say democracies are messy, certainly ours is, and our alliance is not always manifested in the principles that we wish that we would work with. I am deeply frustrated with Prime Minister Netanyahu. I've been clear about that for years. He has missed the opportunity to help architect security and governance structures in Gaza that would truly marginalize Hamas and ensure its long-term defeat. What Sinwar fears is not Israel. He fears Fatah. He fears an alternative for the Palestinian people that makes his nihilistic agenda seem hopeless to them. And Netanyahu has not allowed that to come to the fore with partnerships with the UAE and Saudi Arabia and the United States and others. So I'm frustrated with Netanyahu too. But that does not change the fundamental maxim that the United States and Israel are two freedom-loving democracies fighting against the Islamic Republic of Iran's 50-year mission to destroy the Jewish people and to destroy democracy and freedom in the Middle East and beyond.
Congressman Jake Auchincloss, Democrat from Massachusetts. I know you're on the move tonight. Thanks for being with us here on the Hill. Appreciate the time, sir.
Nice to be with you.
You got it. You as well. All right, now back here in Washington. Meantime, the fight over FEMA funding is intensifying. One devastating storm after what's likely to be another as Hurricane Milton heads for Florida as a Category 5. FEMA money is running out. Our Joe Khalil has been looking into this issue. Our Kelly Meyer was at the White House today as the administration was peppered with questions nonstop. Joe, Kelly here with me live.
What's up?
Where is FEMA right now?
So mixed messaging from them. Today they say they've got enough funding for both Helene and Milton, and that's good news. They say they're not going to run out of funding or resources, and they're not going to have to divert from one to the other. But mixed messaging because just a few days ago we heard Secretary Mayorkas say if there's a storm after Helene, they would be at risk of running out and having to go back to Congress.
So they're walking it back?
So what they've said is they reassess. My question was, what changed? They said we reassess what's in that disaster relief fund as they go because they have to see what they have to spend on Helene. So there's a maybe trust issue there, but at least right now it sounds like good news.
Trust issue with the government?
Who would have thought, right?
You were in the White House briefing room today. Yeah. Karine Jean-Pierre peppered with questions about the federal response.
Yeah.
What was asked, what was answered?
Yeah, and going off of what Joe was saying, President Biden did put out there to Congress that he might ask them to come back to add to this pot in the future, saying that they do have enough to respond to right now, but they may need to in the future. So she was getting questions in the briefing today. Why can the U.S. give money to Lebanon, for example, for humanitarian aid, $157 million, but not have the money ready to give to FEMA? Why do you have to bring Congress back? She was arguing there was a lot of questions around misinformation. She was saying right now we do, again, have the money to address this hurricane and the next. It might be in the future, but she was trying to say that there's a lot of misinformation going around. People can get this aid. People are getting aid, and not to stop applying for it.
It was interesting because Congressman Michael Waltz, Republican from the northeastern part of Florida, was on the show tonight, suggested obviously you got to wait and see what happens, but maybe he would be in favor of more funding if they're called back and asked for it. Kamala Harris spoke to reporters today. Here's what she had to say.
Listen to your sheriff around the places that have been impacted by Helene. Listen to your local sheriff who's going to tell you straight about what's available to you.
The reality is Helene was awful, devastating, the deadliest hurricane since Katrina. There's going to be another awful, devastating category 3, 4, 5, however it shakes out, just horrible here in the upcoming 48 hours or so. In the politics of this, with 3 weeks to go before a presidential election, you're out on the trail every day, you're out often, it's not going away anytime soon.
Right, and it's getting messy. The politics, and you asked if it's coming into this, and it's hard to keep that out of this moment. We see it coming onto the campaign trail. Former President Trump talking about it just in his Truth Social post today about the help for North Carolina. So it is front and center, but they're trying to make sure, especially at the White House, the message from them at the podium is, hey, you have Republican governors saying thank you for your help to a Democratic administration. So they're trying to show that it's both sides.
Even on the FEMA call today, they said what we're concerned about most is people believing the misinformation and then not applying for the help they otherwise would be entitled to. So when it's actually impacting people on the ground, that's a different story than just both sides blaming each other. You don't want to see that.
Joe Kay, Kelly Meyer, thank you both. Appreciate it. Still to come here on the Hill. Donald Trump expected to speak any moment now on the October 7th attack. Live look right now in Doral, Florida. He's there at one of his properties. If he starts speaking on this show, we will take you there live. Plus, what the White House is doing to provide help for hurricane victims as Florida braces for yet another monster. The full panel on the other side of the break. Stay with us.
Tomorrow, exclusively on NewsNation, Michigan, Democrat Alyssa Slavkin and Republican Mike Rogers take the debate stage. Then Chris Cuomo breaks down this key race tomorrow, 7, 6 Central on NewsNation. News for all America.
Welcome back here to the Hill on NewsNation. Back with the full panel right now. Joel Rubin, Democratic strategist. Michaela Carr, former chief of staff to Speaker McCarthy. Ashley Davis, former official in the George W. Bush White House. Scott Bolden, NewsNation contributor. Welcome back. Appreciate it. As Hurricane Milton bears down on Florida as a Category 5, the White House is defending its response to Hurricane Helene, devastating the Southeast and taking the lives of more than 200 people.
As the president has said, when it comes to this whole of government response, we are sparing no resource here.
The hurricane's also having impacts on the race for the White House. Today, Donald Trump postponed his planned town hall event in Florida for tomorrow as Milton prepares to make landfall on Wednesday. You can imagine that both of these candidates are completely ripping up sort of the playbook right now, throwing it out the window, as of course this will be the biggest story of the week. It's certainly in the upcoming days. In the White House, you dealt with this. It's awful on a lot of levels. It's a 1-2 punch with major storms. What are they trying to do tonight to prepare for this? And what are the campaigns doing going forward?
Well, this could change the entire conversation about the campaign. I already think the first storm already did. But first of all, we should thank the men and women that serve for FEMA. They there's a lot of missteps within FEMA sometimes, but also they do a lot of work for people. But the issue that's going to be a problem, remember that Katrina pretty much started sinking Bush's second term.
Heck of a job, Brownie.
And so that, and remember the helicopter photo. And so it's interesting because Biden just did the helicopter photo last week and there was not the same reaction. But I think that if it could change the race because of voting. In North Carolina, a lot of the areas that were destroyed were Republican areas. So are they able to vote a month from now? They don't have houses. And number two, if they don't handle this properly and if there's not enough money, people will think that, does President Trump do a better job at a response?
Does the current administration care enough? That would be the question no matter who's in the Oval Office.
Absolutely.
Of course they care,
of course they care.
But the politicalization of the lives of 200 people dying because of this hurricane makes no sense on the GOP side, because even Republican governors are saying that the money has been there, the resources have been there, and they have a great working relationship with the Biden administration. Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are the ones that saying just the opposite.
But on the ground, it's survival, right?
Yeah,
it's survival on the ground at this point. If you don't have water, power, food,
And I'm saying they're moving a lot of those resources into those areas. Some of those areas they still can't get to. But I haven't heard any complaints from the Republican governors of those states affected by this hurricane.
Former Chief of Staff to Speaker of the House, I just had a Republican member of Congress tell me, yeah, depending on what happens, I'd be okay with more money for FEMA going forward. What's that fight going to be like here in the upcoming months? Congress is out of town right now.
Yeah, I don't see Congress coming back between now and the election to solve this. Like it or not, there are a lot of ways that the federal government can move money around. We've seen that happen a lot. Often we see it happen in ways that the American people don't necessarily agree with. I think here there is no straight-faced argument for the Biden-Harris administration to make that they need more money right now. They've been finding money for every special project.
Let me ask you this.
They can find money for this.
If there was back-to-back storms, say, in New York, maybe where Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are from, or back-to-back storms, let's just say, in Louisiana, where the House Speaker is from, would the calculation here be different?
I don't think it would be any different. You see these fights, it would become louder maybe, but you see these fights, you need to move a lot to call the House back and get them to reallocate money.
And also there is an important governor's race happening now. It doesn't serve any Democratic political imperative to have the president undermine Josh Stein right now, who wants to win that election.
In North Carolina.
In North Carolina.
All right, you are looking live right now, Doral, Florida, where former President Trump set to deliver remarks on the anniversary of the October 7th attacks. Earlier today, he was in New York visiting the grave site of an influential Orthodox rabbi. Kamala Harris, the vice president, in Washington, planting a memorial pomegranate tree on the grounds of the vice presidential residence. She also delivered remarks promising to ensure Israel has what it needs to defend itself. President Biden, meantime, holding a candle lighting at the White House. He did not make any comments. You were involved, Joel, with this today, with speaking to the senior-most folks here in town. I found it interesting. The president sort of, I don't want to say took a back seat, but he let Kamala Harris be the one to speak today on this 3 weeks down the home stretch, not the commander-in-chief.
Well, Blake, I think this is the Biden-Harris team working together since October 7th. And I'll speak from the heart. I was at the Israeli embassy today for a commemoration of what happened a year ago, the horrific attacks against Israel by Hamas, a terrorist organization that should not exist. And it was bipartisan. It was official in the sense of really bringing people together. And I think that's what we see with the vice president in the way that she is leaning into this with a solemnity that it deserves. There was a fact sheet that did go out that the Biden administration, with the support of Congress, both sides of the aisle, both chambers, has moved $18 billion over to Israel since the beginning of the war last year. And I think that's the kind of leadership that we need. So President Biden, he's been out front significantly. I think the vice president, she too, has been very strong on this, and it shows.
Real quick, what do you think we're going to hear out of Donald Trump here?
He's going to 100% support Israel. If you think about what Donald Trump did during his presidency with the Abraham Accords, who thought that would ever happen with their trade agreement with the region, also with moving the embassy to Jerusalem, no one said he would ever going to be able to do that. Donald Trump and Republicans all support, and 100%, not the funding with restrictions, which is what the Biden administration is doing.
That's not, this is bipartisan. What the Biden team has done, and I apologies for interrupting, but it's a bipartisan issue. The support for Israel is long-standing bipartisan support, and we need to stick to that. I think the problem...
There's some parts of your party who need to stick to that.
There are some that need to be quiet, without a doubt. But Donald Trump has tried to politicize this, as I say it gently, has been politicizing the Israel relationship to try to gain votes, and that's not along the lines of longstanding American tradition towards Israel.
Real quick, I thought the dynamic today at the vice president's home was really interesting. Doug Emhoff, her husband, who is painfully lost and is Jewish, spoke after the vice president. The vice president spoke first, and then her husband spoke after that. And I think normally she would be the last to speak. And I think she did that in deference to not only his Jewish faith, but also the pain that he's suffering.
I'll give you the last word here. Donald Trump.
Look, it's hard to commemorate something that isn't over yet. And we still have hostages in the Middle East. We still have Americans being held. And this is something that we need to remain completely steadfast on. You're absolutely right. It shouldn't be partisan. Unfortunately, it has become so. And we need to remind Israel that we are steadfast in support. And they are fighting not just their own enemy. They are fighting an enemy that calls us the great Satan in Iran.
To your point, there are 4 Americans who are still being held hostage by Hamas, a foreign terrorist organization, designated so by President Clinton, and remaining a foreign terrorist organization, whether it's been a Democratic or Republican administration. Every single one rightfully has kept that designation. And tonight, 4 Americans, a year later, still remain hostage. Coming up, we await Trump's remarks where he is set to speak on the October 7th attack on Israel at an event in Miami. Live look there. As you can see, Trump any moment now. Leland Vittert, host of On Balance, on the other side of the break. All right, welcome back here to The Hill on News Nation. Today, of course, marks the 1-year anniversary of Hamas invading Israel and murdering more than 200 Israelis. Protests we saw in several spots across the country today. Leland Vittert, host of On Balance, joins me live. Leland, I saw this. This commemorates one of the darkest days in the history of Israel. 1,200 people murdered, 254 hostages taken. There are still 4 Americans who are being held hostage tonight, some 365 days later. And you see this on a day like today, and it's abhorrent.
Let's clear up a couple of things. Number one, this lays bare the fallacy that these were pro-Palestinians who were worried about starving children in Gaza. They're not. They are pro-terrorist sympathizers. And if you think a year later, you would have hoped October 7th would have brought the world together to confront Iran and to confront their genocidal regime that exists in Tehran. Instead, what October 7th did, and I think in large part because of how it was handled here in the United States, exposed this cancer growing, particularly on America's left, of terrorist-supporting, Jew-hating progressives. There's a huge difference in that. These are not anti-Semites. Anti-Semites talk about how they don't like bagels. These people are supporting people who call for the extermination of the Jewish state. They need to be called what they are.
What do you got coming up? Who do you have coming up on the show?
John Bolton coming up on that. And how Israel is going to respond. And also fascinating, Kamala Harris seemed to view Benjamin Netanyahu as much more of an enemy than Iran is.
The comments that she made on 60 Minutes?
Exactly. So
All right.
we'll get on that with John Bolton. Bill O'Reilly coming up on Donald Trump's rally.